Well, would you please describe what you do in general, and then more specifically what you've been doing recently with disaster relief?
Sure. Well, we work at the Houston Galveston Institute, and there we've been for many, many years exploring applications of postmodernism and social constructionism to psychotherapy, training, and research. We have clinical practices. We have people who come to work with us, and we also go out into the community and consult and work on different projects, and one of the most recent ones has been around disaster mental health. Do you want to say a little about that?
We've been involved with disaster mental health prior to Katrina. When Hurricane Katrina hit Houston in 2005, we became very active and were one of the central organizations that around mental health that organize the community, and have been developing ideas about what kinds of practices are helpful, and especially focusing on community efforts, community resiliency. What does that really look like? How do you measure that? Because there's still individual measures being used too, or adopted, or co-opting community into individuals. So we wanted to be more systemic. So that's been a large part. And then just a week back, we had Hurricane Ike come right through Houston.
Galveston.
And Galveston is pretty down. So that's kind of what the background is with which we are again activating and we are organizing. So
we've been, and always have, sort of looked outside the box and beyond the typical ways that people think about mental health and mental health practices, and started expanding the frames in terms of what is a response, what is therapy, what is helpful to people, and who knows what's helpful. And all those ideas that you're mentioning in terms of resiliency, and that people typically are resilient, and that even people who may look like they're struggling have ways of coping that often don't get recognized or strengthened or supported in mental health practices.
And broadening the notion of mental health, not to be just a mental illness kind of a notion, which is very popular in the US, but to be much more, especially in disaster mental health, to think about it as psychosocial and being more cultural in terms of what are the cultural values around recovery, around health, around mental health, and trying to bring that into play. And also integrating mental health with other services. Right now it tends to get sidelined, or it tends to sit apart. So not wanting to stigmatize, but also to say that there are other ways. So one of the ways we're expanding is by introducing new language, new ways of framing, and so we've been talking about the notion of social engagement. Do you want to add more to that?
Well, before I get there, one of the things I wanted to say is that our commitment is always to look at what's not working. Where are the gaps? Who's not getting served? Who's needing services, and who's needing support, and who's needing positioning in the dialogue and not there. So one of the things that happened after Katrina, and we had 100,000 people come to Houston from New Orleans who have continued to stay and to try to sort through whether this will be home or not, or go back, is that they weren't coming for services. They weren't coming for mental health services. They were unhappy and upset and frustrated and angry and what people might call traumatized, et cetera, by everything that they had been through. And they didn't trust the systems that were out there. And I'm labeling and categorizing right now, which I hate to do, but I think it's important to note that the ideas that people would come, even if we had free services, and utilize our services the way we professionals construct them, doesn't fit for most people. And
can I jump in?
Yeah.
And when you said you're categorizing, I think we have to be that it takes categories sometimes and labels to make sense. But we have to stay reflexive about what that means. And when it becomes too fixed, that's what makes it problematic. So continuing to be aware and questioning of our categories and labels is part of the practice.
Right.
And continuing to shift that is also part of our practice. And we don't just shift it, it's continuing to work with the community that we're working with to shift and create those categories, those ways of being is critical.
So let me jump in and say that, again, recognizing that, you know, there were certainly some gaps and some needs that weren't being met by the constructs that we had in place. So the idea of being in the community, in the places where people were gathering, where people were socializing, where people were getting other needs met, as you were saying, not to separate mental health from other things, but to work together.
And how did you do that?
Yeah, we have created partnerships and relationships with providers of other kinds of social services, healthcare providers, food and clothes and ministries and churches and other kinds of agencies that deliver other services, and we've paired there and sometimes sat there and visited with people who are waiting for things in line. We went to a town hall meeting. You know, there were a number of those kinds of things where, you know, the political issues are dealt with, but nobody, I say nobody, but our concern was that the emotional consequences of talking about the political issues in those kinds of gatherings weren't being attended to. So being available, being there, being present, being with people as they're in community and in social experiences, potentially looking for support or having emotional reactions to things that the planners wouldn't have anticipated is part of what we
I would add to that, it's
did.
a way of thinking about it at both micro and macro levels. So at the micro level, it could be like at a distribution center walking up and down, or a shelter walking where people are sleeping and resting and checking in, whether it is to get them a glass of water or walk with them to find out what's the next step in their life. That's a micro. And the macro is working with the government, working to create preparedness plans, recovery plans, talking to organizations, because there's something known as the voluntary organized activated disaster, VOAD, VOAD. So part of it is being involved in your community at that level, having meetings when you don't have disasters. And the other thing that is a concept, couple of other concepts that we've been playing is to think about this as performative practices. How do we perform as practitioners? How do we perform as clients? And what does it mean to be disaster mental health in a performative notion? So continuing to be reflexive, but also seeing it as acts, as interactions. So we are curious and researching and inquiring into that, as well as these notions of what is community-based and what is community engagement and what is community-oriented, because I think there are nuances there that shift how we perform. So for example, one of our latest projects is having a mobile unit, a mental health mobile unit. And we go to the apartment complexes. Houston is the kind of place where public transportation is just bad. And so people can't get around. So the unit goes and locates. That's an example of community-based, but it's also community-engaged, because we engage with the people, the apartment owners, etc., and talk to them about what needs to happen, how it needs to happen. So we didn't just go with the idea of they're only going to provide these kinds of services.
We're participating on a lot of levels.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So those are the different ways, and then we're researching and training around these issues as well. So if anybody is interested in joining us and being partners in other areas, we would really welcome a dialogue and inquiry into this further, because I think that's kind of taking it into the larger realm.
Can I ask how many of you are doing this? This is enormous.
Well, we have a large group of faculty, learners, staff, and then of course our community partners, including our funders, who all dialogue with us as we plan projects, and we really feel like the breadth is important.